And now to the analysis of Shields and Brooks. That is syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Gentlemen, welcome. Big news, the equivalent of an earthquake, I guess, in Washington, political earthquake. Mark, what does it mean that Anthony Kennedy is stepping down from the Supreme Court? What does it mean for the court? What does it mean for this city, for the country?
It's significant. No, let me just say, God likes Donald Trump because she has now given him a second appointee to the Supreme Court, something that Barack Obama in 8 years got 2, Bill Clinton in 8 years got 2, George W. Bush in 8 years got 2. He's getting 2 in 18 months. Anthony Kennedy is getting encomiums of praise, in large part, Judy, from 2 sources. One, he was a gentleman. He was considerate to those around him. There was no personalizing or polarizing to him, and that is welcome and refreshing in this Washington. But the second thing is he was a liberal on individual rights and sort of social issues. He was not on economic issues. He always came down on the side of corporations against consumers and on the side of the employer against the boss. And he wrote probably the worst opinion, in my judgment, in the history of American politics, and the campaign permitting corporations to make unlimited campaign contributions and allowing the gushing of water of money into campaigns. But he has been a key vote on capital punishment, on a whole host of issues, including gay marriage and ratifying Roe v. Wade. So in that sense, that the nominee will be to the right of him, and it will perhaps energize Republicans who were not energized about 2018.
How do you see his legacy?
Well, first, it struck me as a lot of my progressive friends are reacting like losing Kennedy is like losing, I don't know, Franklin Roosevelt, like suddenly they're all on his side, which is odd to me because in most of his decisions, Citizens United and Bush v. Gore, he voted very solidly with the conservatives, but it shows the prominence of 2 issues for progressives, which is abortion and gay marriage. And it shows how the social issues really are what motivate people these days. I would say I'd characterize him as a pragmatic libertarian. Tend to emphasizes individual rights and freedoms, and so sometimes that went a lot of the time it went a little right, sometimes it went a little left, but it tended to be an individualistic mindset, which had some good virtues. I thought in general, it weakened any sense of community, any sense of we have a shared nation, because his worldview was so individualistic. Nonetheless, he was just a very courtly man, a very good man to be around in Washington, an exemplar of an old-style public servant. As for the politics, I agree with Mark. It's just a total gift for Republicans. It will unify the right. It will energize the right. It will energize the left too. But in the coming campaign, it puts pressure on the people in the middle. And so Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins on the Republican side, it puts some pressure on them, but I don't think a whole lot. They voted for Gorsuch. That's right. But it puts a bunch of pressure on the centrist Democrats who are running in red states. And I think it puts more pressure on the Democrats than it does on the Republicans.
You don't see
well, yeah, I agree with David. Joe Manchin in West Virginia, who I think has to be favored for re-election as a Democrat in a state, Donald Trump's best state, that he won by 42%. It's going to be a difficult vote for him, especially if Mitch McConnell, in all likelihood, holds the vote around Halloween to keep attention riveted on the issue. Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, a state that Donald Trump carried by 36%, Democratic incumbent. Joe Donnelly in Indiana, that he carried by 17%, and Claire McCaskill in Missouri, that Donald Trump carried by 19%. It's going to be a lot of political pressure for them. Judy, the key to me is, this is a bigger issue, the Supreme Court has been, for conservatives and Republicans than it has been historically for Democrats. For example, in the exit polls in 2016, the Clinton-Trump race, 26% of the Republican voters said the Supreme Court and who sat on it was an urgent vote matter to them, to the point that it affected and influenced their votes. Only 18% of Democrats said that it was for them. So it's a built-in emotional advantage at a time when Republican enthusiasm and interest in the 28 campaign had been sapping and had been dripping.
Yeah. I wonder if that'll change now, because this pick obviously puts Roe v. Wade right at the center of our politics. And it's it'll actually open up something very interesting. I don't think it's the nightmare scenario on either side. I don't think it's probably going to happen. Which is that Roe v. Wade will suddenly be overturned.
Yeah.
Because there is this precedent which Justice Roberts has maintained through most of the terms, and the Obamacare case is a good example of saying, I may agree, I may not agree, but what's settled law is settled law. He's tended to be biased in that direction. And as we go through the hearings, whoever's the nominees, that's what they're going to say. And so they may disagree in principle on Roe v. Wade, but it's reasonably settled, so they may hedge it or something. But I'm not sure we're looking at some massive overturn of Roe v. Wade either way.
But neither one of you sees anything standing in the way of the president getting his choice for the court.
Sure, the choice himself. I mean, we've had nominees rejected before because of something that was discovered or in the position. I would just take one exception to David, and that is over the last generation, Gallup has polled every single year, Americans have become far more tolerant and far less censorious about having a child out of wedlock, or gay rights, or extramarital relations, but the moral acceptability of abortion remains divided exactly where it was 25 years ago. So it is an organizing and galvanizing issue still to this day, even though I think David's right that the status quo or status precedent works to the advantage of those who would preserve it. But how about if it becomes the central issue in the campaign of 2018? Does that help the Democrats? Well, or not? I mean, does it turn out Republicans who might have sat home?
And speaking of that, the Kennedy announcement, David, came the day after progressive Democrats did surprisingly well in a number of the primaries this week. I mean, you had this unusual, in fact, shocking result in New York, where Joseph Crowley, who was somebody who was in a part of the Democratic establishment in the House of Representatives and leadership, was beaten by a 28-year-old young woman who is seen as a self-described socialist Democrat. What's going on with the Democrats, and how do you now that we've got the Supreme Court move, how do you see that playing on top of what's happening?
The core question to me is whether this is David Brat all over again. And David Brat is the guy in Virginia who beat Eric Cantor, and that was a precursor to the Trump phenomenon. It was a sign that anger at establishment Republicans was so high that the party was about to undergo some fundamental, earthquake. And that could be true, but the Crowley loss to me was just one data point among a lot of data points. And there have been some of these races where the Sanders candidate has won, but there's been a lot of races where the mainstream Democratic candidate has won. And so I think the balance of the evidence so far is that Democratic voters around the country are not upset with Democratic establishment the way Republican voters were with the Republican. So I do not see a Sanders wave. I see these one-off cases where this was a very distinct district with a very, very talented candidate. And so she pulled off this amazing victory, but I don't yet see it as part of a national trend.
How do you see it?
I don't see it as part of a national trend. Joe Crowley was an exceptionally popular Democrat. He didn't fit the pattern of somebody who had grown remote from his district. He was the Queen's Democratic boss, a position he'd inherited from his predecessor. But the maxim that all politics is local, which has seemed to be repealed by all politics being national, reasserted itself. I mean, this is a district, Judy, that has changed demographically dramatically. I mean, it's now a distinctly plurality of Hispanic voters, minority voters, and it's down to fewer than 1 out of 5. So it is the House of Representatives. And I will say one thing about Joe Crowley. His concession was as gracious compared to Donald Trump's continuing to savage Mark Sanford and gratuitously attacking Joe Crowley. He sang "Born to Run," Bruce Springsteen song, dedicated to her, to Alexander Ocasio-Cortez.
So you see it as a one-off?
Well, I mean, it's the first time a Democrat incumbent has lost in 3 elections. David described Cantor. There have been a lot of Senate upsets where the right and the Liberty Group and the Tea Party had asserted itself before that.
There was, also it came at a time when the border issue is such a vital issue, which aroused a lot of people's sense of we got to have our people in there. And so, but nonetheless, it still has to be said that voters are upset with establishments. Yeah. And so it's not unlikely that we're going to get more of these.
So quickly, you mentioned the border. Where does the administration stand right now on immigration? I talked to Mark Short, the White House Legislative Affairs Director, a few minutes ago. Mark, what do we see here? I mean, you still have families being separated when they come across the border.
You do, Judy, and you've got competing jurisdictions here of agencies, Health and Human Services, you've got Department of Justice, you've got Homeland Security, you've got the Border Patrol, you've got all of these issues. I think the time has come, if the president is serious about it, if the country is serious about it, to appoint a czar, to give somebody superpowers, whether that person be Colin Powell or General Anthony Zinni, the former four-star Marine CENTCOM commander, Martin Dempsey, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mike Mullen. But I mean somebody who's going to be the face, the voice, to whom all the others are accountable. Because right now,
on immigration,
on the border, on the
border?
family separation in particular at the border, because you can't get answers now.
I don't like any sentence that includes both Trump and czar at the same time. That scares me.
Right.
You know, the problem is not well, there's the management problem, and maybe some sort of administrator would help. But the core problem is the Trump administration, at least large parts of it, wants to send an intimidating message down to people south of the border: don't try to come up here, it'll be miserable for you. But they don't want to face the total political backlash of having a completely cruel policy. So they're stuck in the horns of that dilemma. At the same time, they're stuck in a bit of a legislative logjam. So I think the lesson should be that, you know, we're not going to be monsters at the border. We're going to enforce the law, but we're not going to be total monsters. But that goes against the policy that Jeff Sessions wants to support.
But just in a few seconds, is it doing political damage to the administration?
Well, Mark and I had a little discussion last week whether it hurt Trump's approval rating, and I hate to say it, but I was right, and that it has not hurt his approval rating.
Well, no, I mean, it dropped. His Gallup dropped precipitously.
Okay, I just looked at the numbers, so we'll come back next
We'll
week.
come back next Friday.
You pick your own numbers, David. That's what you're going to do.
The Trump poll had him just
How
right
much
up
is
there.
11 and 7? Is it 17?
Hang around after the show. It gets even more exciting. Mark Shields, David Brooks, thank you.